Okay, good morning. We've got about 30 or so people. Welcome to the Micro Learning Project. You're probably on mute, which is fine. I'm going to take myself off video in a little bit just so you can focus on the slides and the information I'm going to present and, not be tempted to look at my gray roots. I'm feeling really vulnerable about that right now. Welcome to the Micro Learning Project. Again, this is Rose Markey and I'm working from my in-home studio. This is a new project for UVA Human Resources, the Learning and Development team that we're taking on, and we want to provide you with some thought-provoking ideas and value-added skills that you can use both professionally and personally. And this week, I'm going to be sharing key concepts from Brene Brown's Dare to Lead curriculum. So with that, let me stop my video. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screens here. Okay, all of the information that I'm going to share today and the rest of this week is based on the research of Dr. Brene Brown. That research is based off of 20 years, 400,000 pieces of data. And data, when I say data, I mean those are data points that come from interviews that she's had with people. Today, I'm going to be covering the myths of vulnerability, the seats in the shame arena, and that'll make more sense when I get to it, the physiology of shame, and how we shield ourselves. And then at the end of today's presentation, I'll share with you what we're going to cover tomorrow. So hopefully you can come back with me tomorrow. So vulnerability, according to Brene's research, is defined as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And we are all vulnerable and experience vulnerable moments. But here's the slippery slope. When we witness someone doing something that is wrought with uncertainty, risk, and it's emotional, we tend to see it or view it as courage. But when we experience uncertainty, risk, or emotional exposure ourselves, we see it as weakness. So in other words, vulnerability in you, when I see it in you, I see it as courage, but vulnerability in myself, I view it as weakness. And so I want to let that sink in for a little bit. And then I'd ask you to fill in the rest of this sentence prompt. I grew up believing vulnerability was blank. And a lot of people tend to fill in that sentence with weakness, and you can fill it in with whatever you think about, whatever comes to mind. But it's a great place to start to think about not blaming how I was brought up or who raised me or how I was raised, but what were some of those life lessons that came out of it? And when vulnerability presented itself in my, let's say, first family, how did we deal with it? And it's just kind of a great place to start. Again, not blaming, but this is a time to start understanding where does it come from. With this also brings to mind this question. Where do you do vulnerability with awareness, or does a vulnerability do you? We are all susceptible to vulnerability. There's no vulnerability resistance. There's no vaccine. There's no shield. People who live wholeheartedly have learned to lean in to vulnerability. And they do that by practicing love, joy, and belonging. And all of those things are vulnerable, yes? So when you practice love, so imagine that first time that you told someone that you loved them, or joy, just expressing joy and kind of shaking off all the things that mitigate joy, or feeling as if you belong instead of questioning, do I belong here or not? All of that, all of those feelings and emotions come with uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure, the same things that make up vulnerability. So it's just an interesting way to look at it. So I want to talk about the myths of vulnerability. And again, this is based off Brene Brown's research. And as I go through them, I want you to think about which ones really resonate with you. And then I've got a couple of questions to ask you as we finish all 6. The first one is that vulnerability is a weakness, and that's a myth. I've said it once before, but it's worth repeating. When you witness someone really putting themselves out there and leaning into uncertainty, taking a risk, allowing themselves to be exposed emotionally, we see it as courage. Yet when we face it ourselves, we define it as weakness. I don't do vulnerability. That's myth number 2. A lot of us would like to think that this is true. And I think you'll find that if you think that you don't do vulnerability, oftentimes vulnerability is actually doing you. We all have vulnerable moments. What we want to learn is how to do it with awareness, how to be curious about it, and how to beat it back with empathy, which is what we'll talk about in tomorrow's presentation. The third myth is that I can go it alone. When I read this myth and really think about it, I think about the leader who has all the answers, the leader who would rather be the knower and be right rather than being a learner and getting it right. This is the person who uses power over rather than power with, power to, and power within. And those who lead for compliance and control versus cultivating commitment and a shared purpose. The fourth myth is that you can engineer the uncertainty and discomfort out of vulnerability. This is the one for the perfectionists, like myself, the ones who drive themselves and just about everyone else crazy to make sure that everything is perfect, that they've thought of everything, especially when designing a new system, a policy, a process. But what we tend to forget about is that there are people who run those systems, who interpret those policies or processes, and that's where the vulnerability creeps in. The fifth myth is trust comes before vulnerability. Trust and vulnerability are like a slow building or stacking process. Think of it as like a Jenga game. One needs to have the other. We don't meet people and ask them to complete a trust test and then decide to be vulnerable with them. And likewise, we tend to think that vulnerability is disclosure when actually it isn't. Vulnerability is not live tweeting a bikini wax. Vulnerability is not putting out all the problems that I'm having in a relationship out on social media for people to read and comment on. Vulnerability is not disclosing every deep, dark thought or secret when I meet somebody as a way of establishing connection. Rather, vulnerability is that I share my story with those that have earned it. So with those 6 myths of vulnerability in mind, I have 2 questions for you. Which of these myths do you cling to? And what do you need to let go of them? And I pause here on purpose to give you a second to think about that. The next thing I want to cover are these arena moments, okay? So the biggest reason we avoid vulnerability is shame. When I think about doing something that feels vulnerable to me, right? It's risk, it's uncertainty, there's emotional exposure. It's almost as if I'm entering an arena. And I chose this picture of an arena. Well, somebody on this call probably knows exactly where this is. But this is how vulnerability feels to me. And what happens is that when we avoid vulnerability, shame creeps up. And shame has season tickets in the arena. And when I say the arena, I mean the arena of life, of work, of play. We try to be brave and shame shows up. And it's so widespread that it takes up a lot of the seats in the arena. So I want to talk about the sections of the arena. First, you have what are called the cheap seats. The cheap seats are reserved for those who are always hurling advice, judgment, and criticism, but rarely are stepping into the arena themselves. I look at these as strangers. the social media cesspool, people not in the room, even the armchair quarterbacks. And my thought is this: unless you're in the arena or have been in the arena with me, I'm actually not interested in your feedback. You also have the box seats. These are reserved for the people who build the arena to benefit themselves and others that they believe are like them. They determine our odds of success in the arena based on stereotypes, misinformation, and fear. And when you hustle for the box seats, you will lose if you're trying or relying on them to pass you. We also have the season ticket holders. These seats are always filled, always. They're made up of comparison, scarcity, and shame. And they always show up when we're trying to be brave. And what are they chanting? What are the signs that they're making? Typically, it's two things. You're not good enough, and who do you think you are? The fourth section is the support section. And these are the two most important seats or areas in the arena. And they are made up of empathy and self-compassion. They remind you to talk to yourself like you would someone you love. They help you to straddle the tension in the middle. They let you be scared but brave at the same time. They also tell you that pain and possibility can coexist, and that hope and hurt can coexist. So here's a word I want to say about the support section. There are days that I wonder if these people for this support section even know where the arena is. And so to help you, I ask you to try this. I ask you to grab a sticky note. In class, if you ever come to the Dare to Lead program, I'll ask you to do this with a 1-inch by 1-inch sticky note. And I'd ask you to write the names of the people whose opinions really matter to you within the square. And there are times when I think back to the arena, when I'm hustling for the cheap seats or the box seats or the season ticket holders, as I talked about earlier. There are times when I'm hustling for their opinion and their feedback so hard and wondering why I can't please them or why I can't get it right as seen in their eyes. There are the moments that I go back to the square squat, to this 1-inch square piece of paper, and I look to see, are their names on my list? And most of the times, they're not. The last concept I want to talk about is shame shields. These are patterned ways we react to shame. And as I share each of these, I'd ask you to listen and watch for your patterns. The first one is moving away. That's withdrawing, hiding, silencing ourselves, and keeping secrets. There's moving toward, which is seeking to appease and please. And there's moving against, which is trying to gain power over others by being aggressive and using shame to fight shame. So here's an example. If my daughter were to quickly back out of the garage without looking to see if my Jeep was parked in the driveway and backed into it, she might move away by not telling me what she did right away or owning up to it. She might move toward by begging for forgiveness, offering to make it up to me. Or she might move against by telling me that I should have warned her that my vehicle was in the driveway and to volunteer to move it for her. Perhaps you use different shields based on different people, situations, circumstances, or events. And so the question for you is, whom are you more likely to move toward, away, or against? What are specific triggers that prompt you? And do you have a go-to shame shield that you grab in certain situations? So I know that was a lot to cover in 15 minutes. And for me, it went really fast. If you want more information on how to enroll in the Dare to Lead programs we're offering this fall, please visit our Learning and Development website regularly. It's part of the HR or Human Resources website. Once I get the specifics from Brene on how we can deliver the program effectively and remotely, I'll post the details there. Thank you for your time today, and I hope to see you tomorrow morning at 9:30 when we talk about empathy, sympathy, compassion, and blame. And last but not least, we'd love to get your feedback. So you have an opportunity here to, you have a QR code. If you've got that app on your phone, you can capture it there, or you can go to the chat feature And my cohort, Kate, will enter the code so that you can capture that code and go straight to the survey and give us some feedback on what you thought about today. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.